things to offer you today. So good afternoon. My name is Gwendolyn Alker with Josh Abrams. I'm the conference chair of AFA 2011. We want to welcome you to this event as an event that we had great expectations about and some trepidation. The trepidation was mainly about the challenges of bringing 4 international speakers from different parts of the world into a specific location at a specific time. However, they're all here, so we are very pleased that they have all made it. You do have a program for this event, and it includes some dramaturgical notes from Josh and I, as well as the short bios of our speakers, so I'm not going to spend too much time on that. Please know that the longer bios are also available at afa.org on the conference website, another opportunity for technology to enrich your life further. So I want to talk a little bit more about the genesis of this project, adding to what I had said in the program notes, which are really more about the structural reasonings behind this event. So to talk a little bit thematically about how we came to the idea of interdisciplinarity in global context. When Josh and I became co-chairs, which is an unprecedented event in AFA's history, we were speaking about what we felt were our interests, our passions, what we wanted to bring to this conference. For Josh, that was really thinking about how the discipline of theater and performance is practiced globally, and also AFA's relationship to this, particularly in this moment when we're revisiting our strategic plan. For myself, my passion was to think about how AFA has always been at the center of bringing theorists and practitioners into the same space and to hopefully similar conversations, as we are the only conference nationally that does this. And I think that that marks us as a very special and particular organization. But I also felt that these conversations don't always happen in productive manners at the conference-wide level, but instead we move into our pockets of those who define as theorists or those who define as practitioners, and ne'er the twain shall meet. Thus, we wanted to bridge both of those divides, and we felt that the concept of interdisciplinarity did so quite gracefully. Hence, the theme for today's event. To end, that idea with a quote. Hopefully you folks read your plenary texts, which are also available online. I know it's tricky to get online access in the hotel, but Mshai did submit a plenary text which ended with the following quote, which I think kind of speaks to one of the questions of globalization in that conversation we wanted to invoke. Mshai said, "Theater departments that focus primarily on Western traditions of theater with a tokenist, if that exploration of other theater traditions and developments elsewhere in the world limit themselves and risk becoming increasingly irrelevant." So as AFA moves forward, I think we need to engender conversations globally and try to enter into a more relevant exchange. So I would like to thank not only the presenters, but also the staff, Nancy and her staff, for making this event happen. This was a very challenging event to bring together, and I would also like to thank the translators. So if I could just quickly introduce the translators to my right. We have for Pascale, we have Carlos Garcia Estevez. So Carlos, can you give a wave? Yes. For Miguel, we have 2 translators, Carlos Manuel and Ana Lola Santana. So, muchísimas gracias a los tres de vosotros. And then I just want to take a moment to thank the panelists and to say that it was truly a miracle of God, who I don't always believe in, but truly a miracle of God that everybody is here. And this, I think, really speaks to the challenges that we face to have global conversations. So if I may give the particular example, and I want to note that the challenges that we found were notably not east-west, they were really north-south. So the speakers that came from Europe or Eastern Europe, it was no problem getting them here. Whereas the speakers who were from the south, as in third world countries, from Kenya, from Peru, it was very challenging to get them here for a number of issues, including visa applications, flight delays, you know, not good infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. So I think that's something that we need to acknowledge very pragmatically. So in other words, just to say that we're very pleased that this is occurring, and we also need to think as AFA goes forward about how we bring together a global conversation and the challenges that that presents. So to present the presenters, they are going to speak in alphabetical order, so I will go from my right first with Marin Blazevic. Marin, the full bio is in your program, so I will not go through that, but he wanted us to know that he was the conference director of PSI 15, and he will be at Columbia this fall in the United States on a Fulbright, so he'll be joining our national community. Pascale Lecoq. Pascale, as you probably could tell from her name, is the co-director of Lecoq School in Paris. Mshai Mwangola, who is the chairperson of the governing council of the Kenyan Cultural Center, and Miguel Rubio, who is the artistic director and a founding member of Yuyachkani. Yuyachkani is the oldest theater company in, or probably one of the oldest theater companies in Peru, and they're currently celebrating their 40th anniversary. So without further ado, we're going to pass it over to them, but just to let you know how we will proceed, we will have each speaker speak for about 10-15 minutes, noting that there will be some translation, which may extend those times. Then we will turn into a brief conversation amongst the participants, including conversations to each other, if you're, I think that might be lovely. Then we'd like to open it to the floor for some questions, and then we will be taking these conversations into the more intimate spaces of your plenary response sessions. These speakers will be joining some of them. Josh and I will be kind of floating in and out of those, but we're hoping that that will be not only an opportunity to continue this conversation, but also to think about how these questions emerge at the local level as well. All right. So without further ado, I'll pass it over to Marin.
First of all, I would like to thank Gwendolyn and Josh for inviting me to share my views on interdisciplinarity in and of theatre and performance, their studies and practices. My entryway into the plenary theme will be through dramaturgy, and I hope that my argument will position me as a representative of a particular theatrical, performative, and theoretical tradition, paradigm, if you wish, or context. Since we were instructed by our, can you hear? Yeah? Since we were instructed by our plenary chairs that it should be assumed you have seen our statements, let me only briefly summarize a proposed definition of dramaturgy. Dramaturgy draws its expansive and flexible, often metaphorical conceptual potential from the phenomenon of drama, conceived as action, not play or dramatic text. Then actualization of drama, that is action in performance, all the way from spectacular flash to this representation of flux. And finally, from problematization of drama, that is action, in a particular representation and performative situation. Dramaturgy is a way of thinking and doing theater and cultural performance in general, focused on the following issues: action, situation, and act or event, and finally, a problem. According to Eugenio Barba, dramaturgy is best defined as the work of the actions. Dramaturgy is interpretive, analytical, critical, theoretical work with, around, before, after, and within the action. Marianne van Kerkhoven, who once devised the term new dramaturgy, more recently stated, dramaturgy is for me learning to handle complexity. As I have stated further, it is mainly the complexity of in-betweenness, of being inter. Let me now develop my initial statement and talk about shifting conceptual and operative potentials of dramaturgy in the framework of current post-dramatic theory and practice. If you think about asking me to defend usage of the term post-dramatic, despite the Fuchs versus Lehmann controversy, I would gladly respond later. It is within the post-dramatic paradigm that the dramaturgy has been emancipated from its traditional side activities, such as literary management, dramatic criticism, contextual analysis, adaptation and translation, feedback, service and moderation of the inflamed or dead communication between various subjects of the creative process, especially in the interest of the productivity of directing. Theoretical reflection and self-reflection, analytical observation and self-observation, critical questioning and self-questioning, all aspects of dramaturgical work are often viewed as anticipation or reaction on a safe and thus notorious step back from the risk of immediate and actual embodiment. Ideologized and mystified presupposition of the sublime aesthetic experience and artistic expressivity supposedly becoming present in the text and performance. Post-dramatic dramaturgy brings about a significant shift. Autoreferential intention, tendency, or already convention is no longer conducted only indirectly through meta-diegetic or rather meta-mimetic or rather meta-performative layering within dispositives of the work itself, by multiplication or folding of the plans of representation and performance, illusion and reality, fiction and factuality, mimesis and diegesis, text and technique. Autoreferentiality is now introduced in the flow and protocols of the whole process of production, presentation, and reception of performance, thus opening the question of changeability of constellation, communication and activity of subjects and bodies, their interests and potentials in the overall representational or rather performative situation. Within post-dramatic paradigm, dramaturgy is recognized as a mode, way, process of implementation of theatrical, analytical and critical thinking through the tissue of performance within its overall gestures, as a performed exploration of correlations and complementarity of expression and reflection of effect and concept. Theoretical, analytical, critical meta-position is transformed into a dynamic, often dramatic interaction. The complexity of the new or post-dramatic dramaturgy does not arise simply from its in-betweeners. Moreover, it is the complexity of being meta of and in the inter. That is why and how it becomes a dramaturgy that eventually might take over the challenge of innovation. Due to the ambivalent, liminal, complex character of its radius and operative mode, dramaturgy is becoming interactivity, which the institution tames, controls, and directs with arising difficulty. Dramaturgy's paradoxical strategic inability or unwillingness to constitute itself as discipline or simply to institutionalize itself as authorial, as in the case of directing, for example, or executive acting, for instance, activity, enables thinking and testing of resistant, if not transgressive, policy in the sphere of social relations that constitute interrelated processes of production and reception, including revision and redistribution, even non-hierarchical distribution of power, competencies, and disciplines. In their statement, Dramaturgy on Shifting Grounds, Hans-Dieter Lehmann and Patrick Primavesi have recently suggested that dramaturgy and dramaturg can play a momentous role in the possible overcoming of the institutional conditions and constraints of theatre practice, and I would add, theory. Due to its operational and conceptual, at least, doubleness and in-betweenness, dramaturgy might be considered as a meta and interactivity and discipline that has the potential to do both. Enable conciliation and keep provoking further but fruitful disturbances in disputes among the three contesting and yet correlating paradigms or disciplines: drama studies, theatre studies, and performance studies. For drama studies, dramaturgy poses the problem of theatrical staging and warns about the limits of reading dramatic text only as a literary text, which is clear. Dramaturgy is precisely this interdiscipline which problematizes the relationship between drama in its textual form and performative flux. In the case of theatre studies, dramaturgy draws attention to the fact that there is indeed a transfer from scholarly work and academic research to the immediate actuality, as Berto States would say, of aesthetic or at least performative practice. Interweaving of performative theory and theoretical practice scholarly creation and artistic research, thinking and testing of political strategies and social efficacy of performance, brings dramaturgy in the proximity of performance studies. Their relationship is thus more complex. One of the key challenges during conceptualization, constitution, and development of performance studies was and remained the invitation to interaction and mutual reflection of practice and theory or criticism of artistic performance. Richard Schechner and Dwight Conquergood have insisted on the integration between studying performance and doing performance, on the need to accept and embrace a collaborative agenda, intended to refuse and supersede the division of labor between theory and practice, abstraction and embodiment. The issue at stake is a possible transformation of normative social arrangements, an ethics of reciprocity and exchange, even expectation to act on or act against strictly ordered or settled hierarchies of ideas, organizations, or people. I was quoting Conquergood and Schechner. Despite their already achieved institutional status, even latent imperialism, recently addressed by John Mackenzie, performance studies have not given up to challenges of liminality, even when they are turned into vehicles of normativity, as we were warned by the same Mackenzie. It seems the paradoxical mechanisms of liminal norm, or normative liminality, sustains the paradigm of performance studies in the permanent state of potentiality, crisis repetition of promises and expectations of liminal action that could, despite the burden of normativity, lead to a change of situation, therefore to a defining or distinctive dramaturgical event, as I have explained in my statement. All that makes me wonder, what is keeping performance studies away from its abandoned child, or rather an abandoned parent, despite obvious parallelisms? Could it be that such a curious bypassing is not only due to the fact that performance studies, as until recently, predominantly Anglo-American research paradigm, were somehow misrecognizing dramaturgy as literary management, dramatic criticism, adaptation, and therefore production service? That is how, to my knowledge, dramaturgy's capacity was generally understood until recently in the Anglo-American academia and theatrical practice, despite significant exceptions. Or the reason might be that dramaturgy could hinder the perception, or rather self-perception, that performance studies have really sorted their territorial disagreements with theater and literary studies. And moreover, could it be that performance studies are avoiding dramaturgy since it keeps reminding all three research paradigms of the mutual origin of their objects of study in the old Greek notion of drao, to do, to perform, and drama, that is action. On the other hand, if dramaturgy accepts performance studies as its correlative interdiscipline or interactivity, this process could reversibly lead to the spread of dramaturgy beyond production and reception of performing arts, not to mention dramatic theater. The notion of dramaturgy, as well as the main dramaturgical questions, situation, relation, interest, conflict, action, event, could be applied, identified, and examined in everyday life, as it was already pioneered by Goffman. Sport games, rock and pop concerts, election campaigns, mass rallies, or civil wars. In any case, and I will conclude, action and performance are not objects of observation pointing towards the affinity of performance studies and dramaturgy. Are not simply objects of observation pointing towards the affinity of performance studies and dramaturgy. Both performance studies, according to their initial program, and dramaturgy, according to its innovative program, explore performance and action within dramatic representation of performative situation through the flow of its actuality, through immediate work on, but within the meta, but interactions. Performance studies and dramaturgy turn their research object into concurrent means of research. Thank you.
hello. So I'm going to speak to you, but I'm going to try to speak in English. So excuse sometimes my English. And Carlos, who is an ex-student, he's going to sometimes help me, but in a way maybe more also talking about what I'm going to say. So to introduce myself, as Gwendolyn said, that I'm directing the school, but the first time that she invited me, I was a little bit, I was wondering what mean interdisciplinary in the global context. For me, it was a little bit, what's going on with this? I don't know if I can respond to this. And after a while, because our school, it's been 56-year school, my father started this school, and there is already there is 35 different nations in this school, and in a way we feel that we always think about these global things, because there is each year there is lots of different nationalities for all over the world. Maybe in a few words I can just describe how the school is working, and after I can tell you about a little bit the pedagogy of the school. So the school it's a school for 2 years. There is a first year course for 1 year, and it's all the theme of the school. It's about creation, and it's a pedagogy in movement. So the first year is dedicated to observation of life, observation of movement, and after there is a second year it's dedicated more for actors, and we're working about different very important styles of theater. So for us, the important thing is this pedagogy that my father started was, in a way, it was working with the student. All the school is about the relation between creation and the student. Where what we said that it's the student who do the school. It's in this relation who the school is still alive. It's been 50 years. So maybe, Carlos, you can say a little things about...
Yeah, for example, the creation, how the Buffon arrives to the school in the late 60s, which in the room where they were working, it was no heater. So the students came with a lot of clothes, and Jack was just allowed in this, and that's one of the reasons why the Buffon start to appear in the pedagogy of the school. For example, this way of listening the students and being adapting the school on them.
So and now it's still like this. We've got like seven teachers who are working with the students, and we always try to make them create their own theater. So the relation with the pedagogy, it's not like we are teaching like a method, but the students are arriving with their ideas, and we try to make them grown up with their ideas. So in a way, it's a very open field in this work. We call it like a journey. For 2 years, people are coming. Usually, it's people who already have done their own school in their countries. They're doing their university or their own company. And when they come in the school, in a way, we ask them to forget what they know at first, and after just to replay. The first year, it's really to observe life, because for Jacques Lecoq, the important thing was life and movement with a big M. So, but to make it alive, it's very important to observe all the time what you've got around us. So it's why we always thinking it's very important for that. The thing is, when we said global thing, that there is interdisciplinarity in our school. Next to the school, we've got a part of the school called the LEM, Laboratory Study of Movement, and I'm directing this part. And this is strange because it's, at first, my background is I'm an architect. So my father started this laboratory with an architect in 1968. And it was a time where there was the disciplinarity mixed. There was like architect want to do theater, theater want to do architecture. There is tons of things, and there is a new pedagogy we just created at that time. And now, still in the school, there is still like things are linked together. For example, at the LEM, there is people who are actors, but also people who are scenographers, set designers, actors, drawers, painters, psychologists, things like this. So there is always trying to push away for the creation that it's an open space. People who do the school sometimes became really something else, can become doctors, writers, directors, but it's not an acting school especially. It's more a creation, we call it a creative school. What else I can say? Well, in our school, we've got also a third year called the pedagogical year. Usually it's like for people who are interested at the pedagogy, especially. Usually there is like 2 or 3 people each year. And in a way they became a student for 1 year more, but they just have to observe all the courses and try to reinvent their own pedagogy. Well, if Carlos said that maybe you should talk about the school today, because since my father is not anymore there, the school was, at first it was quite complicated, but now we've got like 7 teachers who done the school. And it's always like, we always say that he invents something with a pedagogy in movement. So the pedagogy is each day, each year, it's reinvented. Reconfirmed with the student and the teachers. So it's really a relationship between the student and the teachers. It's why we are going on. So I think, well,
So if you've read the statements, it's been trying to set a framework which I'm going to respond to. And also, I'm very conscious as I speak that this is a conference that brings, I just want to set the timer because I'm a storyteller. And need I finish that thought? But also I'm very conscious that this is a conference that brings together people working in higher education and people working in or with theatre. So I was asking myself, what is it I can say that is useful to that range of people? And then, just to add to that, they also reminded us that the panel was about interdisciplinarity in global contexts. So just trying to think about what is it I might start by saying to open up a discussion. I thought that I would use Dwight Conkergood's framework of the 3 A's of performance studies: analysis, artistry, and activism, and then add a 4th, which I have been discovering ever since I went back, ever since I got out of, you have your undergrads and you see them graduate to masters and then doctorate, and if you ever wonder what happens to them after that, I'm going to share that with you. So I'm going to start with my first experience of theatre in higher education. In Kenya, we did not have theatre departments until very recently. And so I did my undergraduate work as it was a Bachelor of Education, but I took every theatre class that I could possibly take at the time. And just to set the context, those of you who've done Ngugi wa Thiong'o's, all that he's written, I went to university after Ngugi left. And so it was a situation where the government was very suspicious of theatre and actually did not want us to think about what theatre did. They wanted us to think of theatre as something that was very much entertainment. So that's the kind of context in which I went to school in. But then there was also for me, and if you look at what I wrote a lot about orature. And that's the context, those of you who see what Boogie has talked about, decolonizing the mind and asking ourselves, what is what we are learning? What does it have to do with who we are as Kenyans, as Africans, as people from the South, as global citizens, and what epistemologies are being privileged? So we were going to school within that context. And we were taking classes. Those of you who read Boogie's work knows that they also reorganized what used to be the English department into the Department of Literature. And so we were both doing language work, but we were also asking ourselves why a lot of the theater work, for example, that had been taught before privileged Europe, and how we could change that so that it privileged Africa and experiences around that. So that just sets the context to some of the things that I had to think about just going through my theatre training. I also just wanted to remind you that I was also being trained as a teacher. So all the time I was asking myself, what does what I do in my theatre classes have to do with what I do as a teacher? But I would say, just to summarize that bit quickly, is that most of the emphasis, as far as I was concerned, was on artistry. How could I be the best actor or the best director that I could be? And all the rest is stuff that I realized afterwards was part of my framework, but not something that we actually dealt with in class. I'll come back to this in a minute. After that, I worked for 5 years. And part of what I did, now in Kenya at that time, there was no such thing as professional theatre. Theatre was something you did after you did the real work, which I know a lot of actors, even in places like here, still do. And I went into a group called Theatre Workshop Productions. Theatre Workshop was known as the, quote, intellectual. And people used to say, the problem with you guys is that you just want us to think when we come to watch your shows. And I'll never forget my sister telling me she doesn't like watching my shows because she said, I want to go to the theatre. When I pick up my ticket, give them my brains and then go in and have fun. And when I come back, I'll pick up my brains and walk out. And we didn't do that kind of theatre. And we were also graduates of what we call the second era of Kenyan theatre. If you've read Ngugi, they were very much in-your-face, confrontational, calling things as it was. The second era is known as the trickster tradition. And these were the people who said, okay, you all did really great work, but then you had to go into exile. We would like to stay in Kenya. We would like to keep teaching. And so they began a tradition which John Ruganda recalls really beautifully, telling the truth laughingly. And I'm going to quote, telling the truth to those in power, but in a manner that depends on the survivalist principle, that good art must protect itself from vilification and its creator from incarceration. And so my influences were people like Francis Imbuga and David Mulwa, who wanted you to come to the theatre, and then you had that moment afterwards. And I will never forget, for the 10th celebration of President Moi's 10 years in power, David Mulwa asked me to direct a play as a student by Francis Imbuga. And it was sitting in the audience on the night that it opened, and hearing the audience laugh at little things that I did not think the audience would pick up, and realizing they were reading political truths in it and terrifying me to death, because I thought, oh my God, I'm going to be arrested. What am I going to tell my mom after this? But I learned to respect the intelligence of my audience and not to have to tell them everything. And I began to get interested, along with Theatre Workshop, on traditions from other countries, because sometimes the only way we could talk about what was happening in Kenya was to put up a play, and if we were asked to say, oh no, that's about Italy, Dario Fo's Can't Pay, Won't Pay, which got us thrown out of the National Theatre when they said, the situation is too close. And actually what I remember about that play was when the censor refused to let us perform it at the National Theatre, he could not find a word in the script that he could use to justify. So what he used to justify was the introduction, where Dario Fo said that after we performed this play in Italy, there were strikes in Italy. Learning to use work like Derek Walcott, Trevor Rohn, Wole Soyinka, Athol Fugard, because as Kenyans we like to say how bad South Africa was. So you would say this is a play about that bad government in South Africa. But your audience knew that you were talking about Kenya. And then we learned to use storytelling. I had grown up very much in a Western theatre tradition. But after we were banned from doing Can't Pay, Won't Pay, the censor said to us, listen, I have nothing against you. Why don't you just do some simple African traditional stories that nobody is going to care about? And so we went back to the simple African traditional stories and found out how subversive they could be. And so I learned to take storytelling and put it on stage, which is one of my favorite things to do. So I think of the second period as learning to be an activist. And this, it was not while I was in school, but it was growing directly from being a student at a university and taking theatre classes. The third phase I want to work with then was my graduate work. I did a master's in creative arts in theatre through the School of Studies in the Creative Arts at the University of Melbourne in Australia. Every time anybody asked me, what were you doing going to Australia? I said, well, it was because I knew nobody who had gone to Australia. All my colleagues had gone to the US or the UK, and I wanted to have a different experience. And that was when I really understood. Later on, I would discover Zora Neale Hurston and talking about you have to leave home sometimes to actually understand home. And looking back through the spyglass, for me it was the spyglass of theatre, to understand my own country and where I was coming from. But also, as I wrote my thesis on Ngugi, this is Australia, and with all due respect to Australia, I love the country, but Australians don't know very much about other parts of the world, particularly Africa. And so I had to learn to interpret what I was seeing by looking at other countries. And it was this moment. My supervisor, Peter Eckersel, was a specialist in Japanese theatre. And poor Peter got assigned me because he was the only person in the department who was not doing non-Western theatre. So we discovered each other. And I remember our first meeting where he began by asking me, who should I be reading? And when I said Wole Soyinka, he'd never heard of him. I said Ngugi wa Thiong'o, he'd never heard of him. I knew I was in trouble. But what was really great was that Peter opened up Asian theatre to me. I too had never done kabuki. I had never heard of traditions of Chinese and other Asian forms, Southeast Asian. And I began to learn how much there was to learn about these traditions that I knew very little about. I also had the wonderful experience of working with Aboriginal theatre and Aboriginal storytelling that was similar but different from our own experiences. And working in a context where being black meant being Aboriginal. Somebody told me to my face that I was not black, and I was completely stunned. I was like, okay, it doesn't get blacker than Africa, and we are in East Africa where the heart is, so I am from the heart of Africa. How can I not be black? And then understanding that there are other experiences that are black and different from my own, just like there is other theatre that is similar but different to my own. And when I look back at that point, the fact that every time I went, it was the first time in my life I realized that when I spoke, people thought I was not just speaking for myself as Mshai, but that I represented Kenya, I represented Africa, I represented every black person in the world. I mean, it was this really scary thing, and learning the burden of representation and the responsibility you take every time you go on stage to tell a story that might not be your own story, but to say, this is who I am, this is my experience, it is important, but it's not everybody else's experience. So I think of that phase as my phase of learning to start to do analysis. And then I came to do my doctorate in performance studies. I remember Peter Eckersel telling me, you are both a theatre person and a performance studies person. I'd never heard of performance studies. So he said, off you go to the US, because that's where they're really doing a lot of cutting edge work. And I ended up at Northwestern, and I do want to recognize, it's great to see several of my teachers here. Sandra Richards, Tracy Davies, I know Patrick Johnson is going to be, if he's not here, he's going to be around sometime. Lisa Merrill, Soyini Madison, Dwight Conkergood, who I know is in the room because he promised me he'd be at my dissertation defense, so I know he's here as well as those who are not here. Because, people like Mary Zimmerman, people like Paul Edwards, people who made me think about what I was doing. I still remember my first year performance where I kept saying, you know, Mary Zimmerman would ask me, why did you just do what you did? And I said, because I felt, it felt right. And she would tell me, that's not enough. You need to think about why it felt right so that you can replicate it or do it another time. And for me, my doctorate was about bringing these three elements together, but also to do it in the context of the US, which is very different. I grew up as a child of the Commonwealth, so it was much easier for me to go to Australia and learn to do theatre there, because Australia draws very much from the British Commonwealth. And America, that is either forgetful or ignorant or just prefers not to deal with the fact that it's part of the British Commonwealth, gives you a whole other different way of thinking about theatre. And I did appreciate that. And I'm saying all that to say, for me, when I advocate for learning to do theatre from all these different traditions and different ways and learning different epistemological traditions, it is not just an appeal to say you must do it in your little department, even though it's very difficult for you to do. And I do understand that for some people, as somebody said, we are two people teaching theatre. How are we going to teach the whole world? But also because it opens up the richness of what it is that you have to do. And in the 2 minutes I have left, I just want to say that the reason it is so important is because you do not know what your students are going to do afterwards. When I left Northwestern in 2007, I went home and I had no idea what I was going to do. And first of all, the first thing I found out, I got to Kenya in December, and Sandra Richards came to visit, and the day she left, and I think there's a story in this, the whole country exploded into post-election violence. And I say there's a story because she said to me the day after she left Nigeria after her sabbatical, there was a coup in the country. So the moral of the story is, do not invite her to your country. But three things I want to very quickly talk about was one of the things that my academic job, I was invited to become what I bet nobody else in this room has ever been, which is an academic planning strategist, which meant I could basically do what I wanted to do because nobody knew what I was doing. But this was to join the planning team of a new university. And it was a university that wanted to work using interdisciplinarity, but wasn't quite sure how to do it. And I was the one person in the team who had to work with the scientists, with the social science and humanity people, and the arts, and get them to talk together. And some of the things we did was a core curriculum that would, now just imagine 60% of the time of all the students would have to be in common courses. And I began to figure out how to use theatre as a tool so that students, and I loved the phrase that Pascale used, it wasn't so much theatre classes, but classes in creativity, so that we could persuade the Dean of the School of Medicine that his students were not wasting time, but that they would become better doctors because they had taken theatre classes. I also, and that's the hat that is on the program, became the chair of the governing council of the Kenya Cultural Center, primarily because I wrote a chapter. So those dissertations are useful. I wrote a chapter in my dissertation about it. And it's as I've said in the notes, it's an incredibly old institution, and we're working with changing what culture and theatre means. And then, and in doing so, and I'm finished with this, I had to learn how to become an administrator. It was great being an activist who kept telling people, do this, you know, you should do that. But then becoming an administrator is to be in the space of responsibility and try to make things work. And my appeal as I finish is to say to you that you need to train your students to not only be good artists and to be good analysts for those who will go into research work, but they need to learn to be good activists. And sometimes activism is activism for the work that cultural workers do. Cultural workers in Kenya are notoriously bad about being activists for themselves. They're great about human rights issues and so on, but they don't know how to make their own work matter. And then to be good administrators, because without good administrators, you will never be able to have the spaces that we need to have. And finally, I close with this. Please, please, make space for theatre from all over the world. Your students will thank you, and you will thank yourself. Thank you.
Va a ser muy difícil hacer una intervención después de una ponencia tan interesante como la de mi colega.
It's going to be really difficult for him to intervene after such an interesting and motivating ponencia and discourse that you just put forth.
Cuando me presentan y me recuerdan que mi grupo tiene 40 años de vida, no puedo sino sentirme como parte del Parque Jurásico del Teatro Latinoamericano.
When they introduce me as the director of a group that is going on 40 years, I can't help but feel like part of the Jurassic Park of Latin American theater.
Pertenezco a una generación de teatristas que surgieron en Latinoamérica a mediados del siglo pasado para inventar un teatro que nos permita dialogar con nuestras comunidades.
I belong to a generation of theater practitioners that began in the midst of the last century with the purpose of reinventing Latin American theater.
El teatro de grupo es una consecuencia de aquello, porque es una respuesta también a esa necesidad de estar vinculado a la comunidad. No es un grupo de teatro, es diferente un grupo de teatro a un teatro de grupo. Un teatro de grupo es una comunidad que investiga.
The theater group to which he belongs is a response to this movement that decided to construct ourselves as a theater group. And a theater group is a collective, is not the same thing as group theater, because a theater collective is a group that investigates. The purpose is not just creation, but also investigation of the process.
Es decir, que este colectivo está unido más allá del espectáculo que le toca hacer.
Which means that this group is united beyond the performance that they are about to embark on. They are united through much more.
Lo multidisciplinario en nosotros es una consecuencia de esa categoría, porque implicaba tomar todas las herramientas necesarias en nuestra comunidad para poder comunicar.
Interdisciplinary work is a direct result of us approaching theater in this way, because we took the tools for creation from the community around us.
Esto ha generado lo que llamamos la cultura de grupo. La cultura de grupo está integrada por la cultura personal que tiene cada actor, por sus saberes, por sus disciplinas, y cómo llegan con esos saberes y esas disciplinas al trabajo escénico.
This has developed into what we call a collective culture, because each actor comes into our collective with their own knowledge and their own experiences that are somehow mixed into our collective experience and our collective creation.
Nuestros maestros nos llamaron a inventar el teatro, y a inventar el teatro que necesitamos, no a repetir el teatro que está formalizado, institucionalizado.
The people that are founding fathers in theater we feel called upon us not to follow in their footsteps as creators, as repeating a creation, but as innovating upon creation.
Esto nos tiene que hacer recordar que el teatro es una construcción cultural históricamente determinada.
This has to remind us that institutional theater and theater in itself has been something that is historically constructed, historically determined as an institution.
Los problemas de nuestra teatralidad tienen que ver con la conquista. Los conquistadores hace 500 años no tuvieron las herramientas para entender la performatividad prehispánica.
The problems that we have as a national theater have to do with colonialism and the conquest. The conquerors that came to Latin America didn't have the necessary tools for understanding native performativity.
Y usaron categorías occidentales para aproximarse a la ritualidad, a esa teatralidad que nosotros llamamos el teatro de la madre.
And they used Western tools in order to understand the rituals and the richness of the cultural traditions that we like to call the mother, the theater of the mother, because of the land.
The theater of the land. Es decir, porque no es el teatro del texto.
Because it's not a theater based on any sort of text.
El teatro en el Perú se enseña como el patito feo de la literatura.
Theater in Peru has become the ugly duckling of literature.
Y no es casual, un Estado fundado en la exclusión también excluye formas tradicionales de teatralidad.
And this isn't anything causal. A state that is founded on exclusion cannot help but exclude theater practices that break from tradition, or the tradition.
Por ejemplo, la dicotomía entre actor y danzante no existe en la cultura tradicional.
For example, the dichotomy between actor and dancer is not something that is perceived in traditional theater.
Existe una palabra en quechua, que es nuestro idioma nativo, que quiere decir taqui, se pronuncia taqui. Taqui quiere decir danzar y cantar al mismo tiempo, danzar y decir.
But in the Quechuan language, they do have a word, which is taqui, pronounced taqui, which means to speak and to dance at the same time.
Son formas tradicionales que privilegian la experiencia antes que la narración, antes que el cuentito aristotélico.
These are native forms that privilege experience over the act of creating a story, the Aristotelian traditional form of telling a story.
Para inventar nuestro teatro, yo les quiero poner un ejemplo de una obra reciente que se llama Sin título técnica mixta.
To give you an example of this, he's going to talk about the most recent performance, which is Untitled mixed form.
Esa obra la hicimos para hablar de 25 años de violencia política en el Perú.
This performance was made on the occasion of marking 25 years of political violence in Peru.
Y no encontrábamos dramaturgia posible para enmarcar todo ese contexto al que queríamos hablar.
And we couldn't find existing dramaturgy or playwriting that embodied all of these different experiences that they wanted to talk about.
Y creamos un espacio como si fuera el depósito de un museo de memoria.
Therefore, we created a space that became an archive of memory, like a museum that archived memories.
Donde incluso el cuerpo del actor documentaba información. Los vestuarios estaban bordados con información.
Where even the body itself of the actor related information. The dressing, their costumes were marked with information.
En el espacio no hay asientos. La gente entra y encuentra en las paredes escritas, hay fotos, documentación, video, momentos danzados, intervenciones de espacio. Es decir, la museografía entra fuertemente a influenciar nuestro teatro.
When the audience comes into this space, there are no seats. What they do find is up on the walls, up on the floor, up on the entire space, photos, videos, documentation. All the space itself becomes a place of what he's calling museografía, which is museography.
Ha sido un proceso muy distinto porque yo le decía a mis actores, hay tanta información tan interesante, yo no quiero que ustedes actúen, no quiero que representen nada.
It was an interesting process when working with my actors because I would tell them, I do not want you to act. I want you to produce action upon these experiences.
Quiero que tu cuerpo sea un soporte de información.
I want for your body to be a vessel of information.
Después de 40 años de vida, mis actores me dijeron, ¿tú qué te crees?
And after 40 years of working with them, my actors told me, who do you think you are?
Hemos trabajado tantas culturas del cuerpo, tantas formas de teatralidad, y ahora tú pides que no representemos.
We have worked so hard on different body movement, different forms of working with the body, and now you don't want us to represent anything with the body, anything in particular.
Por eso la obra se llamó Técnica Mixta, sin título Técnica Mixta, una concesión a los actores.
And that's why the work was named Untitled Mixed Technique, as a concession to the actors themselves.
Esa crisis entre presentar y representar tiene que ver también con la crisis misma de la sociedad peruana en tiempos de violencia.
This crisis between presentation versus representation has a lot to do with the Peruvian nation's own crisis in terms of the Peruvian nation itself.
Porque la impronta de lo real hace entrar en crisis a la ficción en sociedades como las nuestras.
Because the appearance of so-called reality makes a nation such as ours come into crisis.
El tristemente célebre asesor de Fujimori, del dictador Fujimori, Vladimiro Montesinos,
The celebrated, what's the title in English of asesor? Main counselor, main advisor of our dictator Fujimori, Montesinos,
tenía una oficina en el servicio de inteligencia
had an office in the Central Intelligence Agency,
donde registraba todos los actos de corrupción con empresarios, con políticos y con directores de medios de comunicación.
where they would record every instance of corruption with businesses, with people in communications, with any type of important figure within the nation, and this was all recorded within this office.
Se convirtió en el más importante videasta del Perú.
He became the principal documentarist of Peru.
Frente a la contundencia de esa evidencia, de esa información, a eso me refiero cuando digo que eso hace entrar en crisis a la ficción.
Before all of this information, all of these records of reality, that's what I mean about how it makes a nation come into crisis, a fictional crisis, a crisis of fiction.
Por lo tanto, tenemos problemas con los actores, tenemos que generar un tipo de comportamiento escénico diferente, tenemos problemas con el espacio, tenemos problemas con la dramaturgia y tenemos nuevas relaciones con los espectadores.
This has led to problems with the formation of actors, problems with acquiring spaces for performance, problems with playwrights, problems with the institution of theater itself.
Ya hablé de los actores, pero cómo crear una dramaturgia en un espacio donde el espectador no tiene dónde sentarse y donde todo está expuesto para que él pueda elegir aquello que ve.
I've already spoken about the problems with the actors, but how is one supposed to deal with producing in spaces? And their response was producing in spaces where you couldn't sit, where you couldn't move, but you had the choice of choosing what you were going to look at.
Porque nos interesa un espectador que sea un dialogante, no un espectador que consume solamente lo que la escena le da.
Because what we're interested in is a spectator who becomes, who enters into dialogue with us, not a spectator who is purely consuming what we're giving to them.
Nosotros decimos que es un espectador creador que complementa con su propio imaginario lo que la imagen le presenta.
We call this a spectator creator because he complements what he sees with his own experience, with his own dialogue.
Pero no ha sido fácil porque el espectador está fuertemente condicionado por lo que en términos oficiales se entiende teatro y también porque el teatro lo marca, la pauta estética la marca la televisión y el teatro comercial.
But this has not been easy because we've had to retrain the audience. The spectator already comes into the theater marked by the institutional understanding of theater and marked by the mass media itself, television, etc., that has already formed their way of seeing, of perceiving theater and a performance.
Hay espectadores que se resisten y que piensan que no teníamos sillas porque no teníamos dinero para comprar butacas.
There's many spectators who resisted our performance and they thought that as they came into the space, we didn't have seats because we couldn't afford to buy them.
Pero el espectador aprende y es muy interesante lo que sucede cuando todos estamos en un mismo espacio, actores y espectadores en un mismo espacio.
But the audience learns and the audience becomes educated, and it's interesting to see what happens when actor and spectator come together in a space such as this.
Pienso que a partir del año 2000, en que se construye en el Perú una comisión de la verdad y la reconciliación para investigar los acontecimientos de violencia, a partir del año 2000, en que se forma la comisión de la memoria.
Okay. After the year 2000, when in Peru they formed this commission on the preservation of memory.
Eso me parece que hace entrar en crisis a la sociedad peruana porque nos revela un Estado excluyente.
This makes Peruvian society come into crisis because it reveals to us the reality of an excluding state.
Porque el 75% de las víctimas están en 3 departamentos del sur del país que son quechua hablantes.
Because the 3 principal groups that are victims of our society are in 3 different areas that are Quechua speaking.
Más del 50% se concentran en un solo departamento.
More than 50% are concentrated in one specific area.
Lima, que es la capital, que es el lugar de la confluencia de la migración, tardó en enterarse.
Lima, which is the capital, which is the principal spot where immigration makes all different groups come together, was one of the last to find out.
Que en el mismo Perú, en el mismo territorio, existían varios tipos de ciudadanos, algunos que no tenían derechos, la gran mayoría.
Lima was the last to figure out that within an entire nation there were many different groups, many different types of citizens that were completely excluded and victims of the system.
Cuando las víctimas han hablado con voz propia, han cancelado también muchos niveles de actuación y de representación.
When the victims themselves are given a voice, have spoken, that itself cancels out many forms of theatrical representation.
¿Cómo me imagino el futuro?
How do I imagine the future?
Volver al origen.
A return to the origin.
Prescindiendo de todo el artificio.
Leaving out all of the artifice.
Y repensando el teatro como una relación espacio-temporal entre actores y espectadores en un mismo sitio.
And rethinking theater as a temporal space where there is a relationship going on between actor and spectator within the same space.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you.
Thank you all for some fabulous provocations. I'm going to take the moderator's privilege to ask one question before turning it back to you guys. And I guess I'm thinking about something that we all in this room share, and that's that when students come to us, they come with certain expectations of what they're going to be learning. And I think those are often cultural expectations of they walk in the door at 18, convinced that they know exactly what we're going to teach them and what theater is. And I guess I'd like to hear each of you, I'd like to ask if each of you could speak to, as teachers and artists, which what expectations do you feel are culturally specific that are the most important for you to break down in working with students?
I'm teaching at, shall I start? I'm teaching at the Department of Dramaturgy and Theory at the Academy of Drama Arts in Zagreb, and we have quite a specific program which might give you the idea of the scope of dramaturgy that we are dealing with there. We have classes in both theater history, which I'm teaching, and dramaturgical theory. I'm sharing those courses with some other colleagues. Then also playwriting, screenplay writing, so to say, and on the MA level, our students can choose among 3 different programs. One is drama writing, as we call it, the other one is writing for screen, and the third one is dramaturgy of performance. So I'm not really, I guess it's quite open program which gives our students the opportunity to choose among different different kinds of dramaturgical thinking and learning in the field of dramaturgy. We are not that specific about what dramaturgy is or might be, as I have tried to be in my presentation. We are not teaching only post-dramatic theater, we are not preaching post-dramatic theater. It's quite a broad idea of what dramaturgy might be or what it is. Yeah, there is more to say, but other scaffolds to add.
Nosotros hemos creado un espacio que se llama Laboratorio Abierto.
We have created an open workshop.
En este laboratorio abierto vienen estudiantes a vivir con nosotros durante periodos cortos.
During this workshop, the students come to live with us for a short period of time. Sorry, can you hear me now? He's saying that they have created an open workshop, and within these open workshops, they have the students to come to live with them for a short period of time.
Tenemos una casa en Lima donde trabajamos y también un teatro.
We have a house in Lima and a theater where we work.
Y los estudiantes que vienen tienen talleres con mis actores desde las 7 de la mañana, entrenamientos, demostraciones de trabajo. Yo hago conferencias temáticas y hacemos también cursos específicos sobre uso de máscaras, trabajo del cuerpo, dramaturgia. Es un periodo de convivencia, creo que es la única manera de poder transmitir la experiencia.
The students come to study with them from 7 o'clock in the morning, where they learn about masks, about playwriting, about pedagogy, demonstrating work, showing other people's work.
Las demostraciones de trabajo son reflexiones que hacen los actores sobre procesos concluidos.
And then the students are talking about the reflections of works that they have done.
Deconstruimos también las obras.
They deconstruct the plays.
Y analizamos qué hay dentro y cómo fue la cocina interna de la pieza.
And they analyze how the play was cooked from the inside.
Y sobre todo tratamos de entender cuáles son los intereses de los estudiantes que vienen, porque lo que podemos compartir con ellos son herramientas, no son categorías rígidas.
Okay, and what we try to do is try to understand what the students need, so we can try to we try to give them tools so they can use them with the knowledge that they have.
Como por ejemplo la improvisación, ¿no?
Improvisation, for example.
La improvisación no es improvisada.
And the improvisation is not improvised.
La improvisación es el entrenamiento para toma de decisiones rápidas.
The improvisation is the training for fast solutions.
Y ha sido la herramienta fundamental de la creación colectiva, ¿no?
And that has been the main tool for the collective work.
Porque nosotros hemos creado nuestras obras.
Because they have created their own work.
Entendiendo el texto no como literatura, sino como textura, como trama, como telar, como tejido.
So trying to understand that the plays are not text, but they're actually living things as texture, interweaving. Yeah.
Is that mic open? Can we use your mic?
It's also
But how much slack on the wire? Take it off. And we can use that. We have two mics on each side of the.
I was just going to say very briefly, I think for me, and I was thinking through, as Josh asked the question, having taught students from kindergarten to university in 3 countries, Australia, the US, and Kenya, it is to lift that burden of talent and skill, and for students to feel that theatre is a place for growth and not a place for exhibition, so that it is okay to try something and fail at it. It is also okay to step into the unknown and try something that they haven't tried before, or as Miguel was saying, where it is, even the audience might not be quite sure about what you're doing, and to create that safe space to say it is okay to try and grow in this space and to allow others to see you grow.
Yes, so we wanted to open this up to the floor, and we also realized that these are very short statements, and to give you some opportunities for the rest of the conference to interact with these speakers more, that there is a reception being held by ATME for Pascale, which is tonight from 8:30 to 10 in Salon 10, so if you'd like to have informal access to Pascale, I recommend you go to that. And also to let you know that Miguel's workshop, which will be 3 hours of actual movement and tactile work on the Yuyachkani techniques, is still open. So if people are interested in the work that Yuyachkani is doing, that workshop has been moved till tomorrow at 8 a.m. It's a paid workshop, but I think there are still spaces available. And there will now be translation provided, which I think some people were concerned it was just in Spanish, but it will be available with translation. So that being said, perhaps we could just have people come up, and I'll take this mic down on the floor if people would like to. Are there mics out there? I don't see any. There was supposed to be a mic, but it's not there. So if anybody wants to come down here, and we'll give you a mic, so you could share your thoughts or questions, that would be great.
I would like to ask a question to you. I don't know if I'm going to say your name right. Help me. Mshai, that's it. First of all, I want to say that it was very inspiring. So, and you're talking about being an activist. Is that something you also try to, as well, learn to your students? What that means and how to do it? And could you give me an example of how you motivate them of becoming a theatre activist?
Well, it's growing in understanding that, and I'm going back to a phrase Soyini uses, responsibility, but responding in the sense of responding to situations. And for me, when I started out as an activist, it really was that, people would come to us and say, we want to do a play on gender or human rights or something. And more it's becoming asking the people I work with, what are the things that disturb you? And when I was talking about this space between activism and administration, for me, of late, it's become making theatre workers and other culture workers start to think about the things they want to change that make their own work easier. And I'll give you an example. Because of our historical situation, where very much theatre was connected with politics and then later on with development. Our artists are very good at give them anything you want in the world, any topic, globalization, politics, whatever it is, they will create a script out of it. But at the same time, there's very poor pay for artists. Artists are not recognized as doing useful work. And artists are just basically, you know, we use them and then we forget about them. So when I became chair of the Kenya Cultural Center, one of the things that happened at the same time was that we were in the middle of writing our new constitution. And so we had to get artists to come together and then talk to them about why they had to make clear to everybody else that the work they were doing as cultural workers mattered. And it was really funny because all these cultural workers were like, but it's so obvious. Why do we have to tell anyone? And then we tell them, the Ministry of Finance last year, they allocated to 5 ministries 0.05% of the budget, of which culture is one, and out of that, 1,000th of the money went to theatre. And then they would say, oh, and we'd say, that's why you cannot find money from government to do anything. So you have to get out there, and we had to start to give them the reasons to articulate it. We need to make it visible. So one of the things we did was to actually work with the people writing the Constitution so that we got culture as a chapter in the national Constitution. The backlash was that some of the most powerful lobbies, including the very powerful women's lobby, said you cannot have culture in the Constitution. Culture is backward, it's retrogressive, it is a problem, because they were thinking of harmful cultural practices. And we actually lost the battle to keep an entire chapter. But now we have a line in the Constitution that says culture is the foundation of the nation. So now we get artists to say every time you go out there, you need to emphasize. I cite that quotation everywhere I can. It's in my email. It's getting people to think about it so that when I now go to the Ministry of Finance, it will make sense to them to allocate money to culture. So that's the kind of way of doing it, is to say, a lot of times we assume people know that what we do is important, and it's pushing people to say, actually they don't. And we have to make it make sense, not only to ourselves, but in the space. So like, for instance, the Ministry of Finance, we've been talking to them about the work that the creative economy does. Before, when they just used to think of, you know, culture is something, you know, when we have extra money, we'll allocate it to culture. But did you guys miss that the country just almost burnt down? Why should we give you money? Now our argument is because we are going to create so much more money. So we're doing baseline studies and giving the artists those baseline studies to say, this is how much money we generate for the economy, because that's the only argument the Ministry of Finance at the moment will hear.
Other questions come up, yep.
Again, for Mshai. I live in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, and it's an extremely divided, racially divided city. Has been for a long time. And a week ago, there was a white on black, black on white violence at the state fair in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I mean, many people involved in this altercation. And I have such great respect for Fugar and the particular play, Master Harold and the Boys, and its impact in my life personally, having played Hallie in that city. And you mentioned Fugar. Could you please talk a little bit about how Fugar has influenced you in whatever way, please?
Athol Fugard was one of the artists, especially from South Africa, whose work we used a lot. Those early days when I was in university and then afterwards. And it was because, for me, I think it was the first time that I had an opportunity to see somebody who worked with other people's stories. Athol Fugard is colored, he's not black, but he was able to work with black actors, take their stories, and not so much write the plays for them, but then help them create, and what I loved about it was storytelling in very intimate theater spaces that made you afterwards, after going through it, start to see if you want the other in a different way. And for me, what was so interesting at the time was that here he was writing about South Africa, but then you were able to look at it and say, in Kenya, we may not have the same black or white conversations at the historical time I was working, but we have this in terms of ethnicities, for example. And so how does that relate? And I think for me, it became something. Afro-Fugat for me opened up doors to theater workshop techniques that we used a lot. So just his way, the workshop way. There's a reason we're called theater workshop, because we were borrowing from all these and spending time not just studying the work, but studying the process that they came up with. And for me, that opened other doors. So for example, my interest in Afro-Fugat has led to my interest in Anna Devere Smith and seeing how she does that work, similar but different, you know, of taking other people's stories, putting them on the bodies of actors and enabling people to deal with very difficult, very emotional topics and to be able to confront the story of the other in a safe space that might be hurtful, but is useful.
We've got time maybe for one or two more. You guys can battle it out.
This is for Senor Zapata. Hello. I'm wondering, just based on what you've said, that about a possible relationship with El Teatro Campesino, which we have in California. Luis Valdez is very concerned about the bringing into the conversation the ideas of Aztlán and the idea that there is a substrata beneath the culture that needs to be brought out. And it just sounds so similar to the works that you're doing. I wonder what your opinion is about those kinds of exchanges across countries.
Me parece que Luis Valdés es un precursor del teatro en nuestro continente.
I feel that Luis Valdés is a precursor of the theater in our continent.
De esta nueva teatralidad que puede tener en común el problema de la tierra, porque él trabajó con campesinos también agricultores en sus inicios.
Of this type of theatricality that is concerned with the land itself, because Valdés started out with the farm workers, working with the farm workers themselves.
Hasta llegar a esa cosmovisión, ¿no? que él plantea.
Until he arrived to this cosmovision that he puts forth in his later plays.
En el Perú el tema es muy complejo. Durante muchos años nos hemos sentido orgullosos de nuestra diversidad cultural y lo sentimos todavía.
In Peru, it is a very difficult issue to address. We are very proud of our diversity, of our cultural diversity, and it's something that is still felt.
Pero lo que nos falta trabajar es la interculturalidad, cómo esas diferencias necesitan dialogar.
But what we have yet to work with is that notion of interculturality, how to conduct a dialogue between cultures and cultural difference.
Y ahí hay un impasse que cada vez es más grave. Por ejemplo, en estos momentos se está discutiendo la ley de consulta previa.
And here's where you find these difficult moments. For example, right now in the country they are discussing this new law of consulta previa. Consulta previa is the name of it. It's previous.
Que significa preguntar a las comunidades indígenas qué opinan de la explotación de la minería, del petróleo, del gas.
The purpose of this law is to go into the indigenous communities and ask them, what is your opinion about the exploitation in the mines, the exploitations with gas, the exploitations with natural resources?
Y ahí hay un problema muy grave que lo tiene que ver también el Ministerio de Cultura, porque es un problema cultural. Es decir, no solo es un problema económico, la riqueza que puede estar potencialmente debajo de la tierra, sino también es un problema qué cosmovisión hay frente a ese territorio.
And this becomes a very difficult issue for institutions and administrators to understand, because it is not just an economic problem. It is not just about the economics of the land, but there is a cosmovision that is integrated to the issues of the land that are not taken into consideration by the public administration.
Porque la cosmovisión andina tiene tres categorías, ¿no? El Hanajpacha.
Because Andean cosmovision has three different categories. The first one is Hanajpacha,
Es el mundo de arriba, el mundo de afuera.
which means the outside world, the world that is up.
El Ujupacha
Ujupacha.
es el mundo de abajo,
It's the world below us,
donde está la riqueza.
where wealth is concentrated.
Y el Caipacha, que es el mundo de acá, el mundo donde estamos, en la tierra.
And Caipacha, which is the world before us, the world that we are on.
A los economistas y el gobierno no le interesan estas categorías.
The government could care less about these categories.
Pero los campesinos, cuando ven afectado un cerro,
But the farmers, the people who work the land, when they see a mountaintop, a hill become affected in these ways, for example, to exploit for gold, for minerals,
el gobierno les dice que son primitivos, porque ese cerro está representando a una deidad andina.
the government criticizes them, telling them that they're just primitive beings, when they tell them that this hill, this mountain, can represent an Andean Peruvian deity.
Es un tema muy complejo.
It's a very complex issue because of these lacks of understanding.
Great. Time for one more quick question. Do you want to come up, sir?
Actually, it's not a question, but just a comment. I think we have two lacks here. One is I would have liked to have seen a discussant who would have the very difficult job of thinking about what the commonalities are of the presentations. The second lack is dialogue between these wonderful people. A lot of effort has been brought to bring them together. I would have liked to hear their comments about the presentations of the other presenters. Thank you.
So maybe we could just take 5 more minutes if anybody had comments to share with each other on the panel, and then we will move to our plenary responses. So I don't know if any of you want to speak to each other about the other person's presentations.
Well, I don't want to sound too heretic, but that's something that dramaturgs often have to do. What I find surprising at this plenary, in the same time being bewildered and in a way also a bit worried, is that we seem to assume or to accept theater as a kind of unquestionable format or genre of culture performance, a kind of unproblematic form that just exists, and then there are problems around the theater, but we have to apply that form of theater to question problems that are outside of theater, to deal somehow with them. So I just wanted to read a line from one of my favorite dramas or plays ever written, and that is by Daniel Harms. His famous play, if I may call it play, The Performance That Failed. At the end of that half-page play or drama, the girl says, "Dad asked me to tell you that theater is closing down. We are all feeling sick." So I guess my question would be what to do with theater from that perspective, from the perspective of theater as maybe not being able any longer to respond to the world outside of itself, and to the, in a way, amazing moment in theater's history, that, as it seems to me, there are two formats or two genres that make theater have some kind of social impact. On one side, there is applied theater, which has this activist motive, reason, inspiration, which is extremely important, and that is how theater still manages to reach a wider audience and to have some effect on community. And on the other, quite opposite, radically opposite side is the opera, as a kind of multi-spectacle that today is being filmed and transmitted into cinemas. As we know, Met, Covent Garden and the main opera houses are now making their performances available in local cinemas, right? So, would you have some kind of response to that? That was my question. Why do we still actually think so seriously about theatre? Or can we think that seriously about it?
Allô, allô? Je pense que je vais parler en français parce que ça va être plus simple pour moi pour réfléchir.
So I'm gonna try to think, but
Donc moi je suis un peu perdue là parce que
I'm a little bit lost because of this.
À l'école, quand les élèves arrivent à l'école, on leur demande de tout oublier.
When the students they arrive at the school, we ask them to forget everything.
D'oublier ce qu'ils savent.
To forget of all the things that they know.
Mon père disait souvent la tête est en trop.
My father used to say that the head is too much.
Mais le corps, il sait plein de choses.
But the body knows a lot.
Et justement, les corps et le mouvement, c'est universel.
And then it's for it that the school and the body is universal.
Donc les élèves, ils se rencontrent et même nous, on se rencontre aussi par le mouvement.
Then the students and ourselves, we meet each other by movement.
Donc voilà, moi ça m'a intéressé d'entendre Michel, d'entendre, je reconnais pas son, mais toutes ces cultures différentes.
All these different cultures.
À l'école, on est confronté tout le temps à ça.
We are all the time in the school busy with this.
Mais c'est dans la relation, dans la création qu'on invente un nouveau théâtre.
But it's in the relationship and in the creation that we invent a new theater.
Voilà, je trouve. Donc pour les étudiants, c'est aussi important. Il faut qu'il y ait ce mélange-là, le mélange des cultures, mais il se passe par le jeu. Enfin voilà.
It's important that they mix, that the cultures they can mix, but it needs to pass by the play.
Donc voilà.
That's it.
Thank you. I think we're out of time up here with this, but I just want to thank all our speakers again for great provocation. And to remind you that this is just the beginning of the conversation, so on your seats you have some details, and in the program there are details about where each of the different breakout response sessions are, and we'd encourage you to think outside of your comfort zones with these. Go somewhere to focus.